Welcome back to another in our series of great chapters in the Bible. Our chapter today is found in the Old Testament book of 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles chapter 36, Judah's decline and exile. The people of the land took Jehoahaz, son of Josiah, and made him king in his father's place in Jerusalem. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. Then the king of Egypt deposed him in Jerusalem, and laid on the land a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And the king of Egypt made Eliakim his brother king over Judah and Jerusalem, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. But Necho took Jehoahaz his brother and carried him to Egypt. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Against him came up Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in chains to take him to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also carried off the vessels of the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his palace in Babylon. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and the abominations that he did, and what was found against him, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. And Jehoiachin his son reigned in his place. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. In the spring of the year, King Nebuchadnezzar sent and brought him to Babylon with the precious vessels of the house of the Lord, and made his brother Zedekiah king over Judah and Jerusalem. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. He did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke from the mouth of the Lord. He also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear by God. He stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against turning to the Lord, the God of Israel. All the officers of the priests and the people likewise were exceedingly unfaithful, following all the abominations of the nations. And they polluted the house of the Lord that he had made holy in Jerusalem. The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. Therefore he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young man or virgin, old man or aged. He gave them all into his hand, and all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and his princes. All these he brought to Babylon. And they burned the house of God, and broke down the wall of Jerusalem, and burned all its palaces with fire, and destroyed all its precious vessels. He took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and to his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath, to fulfill 70 years. Now in the first year of Cyrus king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus king of Persia, "The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up." There is a method that movie makers use at the end of the film that is quite effective. Rather than going on in a person's life or the situation, they simply put a short description of what happens to them subsequently in the credit rolls. You know the ones. He was killed by a drunk driver one night on his way home, or she never saw her parents again, or his appeal was denied and he spent the remainder of his life in prison. Those heartbreaking lines that you wish they hadn't put up on the screen so that you could have gone to bed at that night in peace. That's how I feel when I read this chapter. Just a punch in the gut that leaves you gasping for air. I wasn't even there, and I feel that way. Can you imagine what it was like for those who were exiled seeing their beloved Jerusalem? I get that sense when I read the 137th Psalm. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung our lyres. And Jeremiah, when he writes in Lamentations chapter 2 and verses 10 and 11, the elders of the daughter of Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have thrown dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. My eyes are spent with weeping. My stomach churns. My bile is poured out to the ground because of the destruction of the daughter of my people, because infants and babies faint in the streets of the city. But for all the weeping and sorrow they feel, it is not unwarranted what God allowed to happen, what God was honor-bound to do. It is rather like the weeping man, what he does. After being jailed, denied his license, fined and warned, he goes out again and while drunk behind the wheel, takes the life of another human being. Or the gambler who time and again has lost food money, car payments, paychecks, and now his house and family. Warned that this could and would eventually happen, nevertheless recklessly tosses it all away. Or the one who flirted one too many times with the one who was not his or her spouse and now sobs at the loss of a marriage. The occurrences are far too many, far too often, and far too tragic to not take seriously. But they continue on in reckless abandon. We might question God's actions at not stopping those marauding Chaldeans. How could he just stand by while the unbelievable carnage takes place? I can't imagine the heartbreak. But right there in the midst of this chapter lies the answer. Verses 15 and 16. The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. Persistently. I just had to look up that word in Hebrew. In the King James, it is rising up betimes and sending them. The New American Standard says, sent word to them again and again. The New King James Version says, rising up early and sending them. In Hebrew, it is the word shakam. It means to start early in the morning, like loading up a beast in the morning for a journey. Just imagine hundreds of years that God tolerated their disobedience. I suppose when we consider how a parent disciplines a child, how that could be taken into consideration here. A loving parent will, because of that love, want the best for a child. Therefore, they take the appropriate measures to ensure they learn. Sometimes only a stern look is required to bring that child in submission. Sometimes withdrawing privileges, sometimes a spanking is required. But in rare cases, a parent must allow that child to bring ruin upon themselves when all of their methods are exhausted. So it was with Judah, until there was no remedy. Listen to that sentence. Until there was no remedy. How many parents have you known who came to that point with their children? How many judges have thrown away the key after repeated attempts to reform behavior in criminals? God finally reaches that point. We may look around at the world we live in and shake our heads at how God has not returned in his wrath to recompense the wicked. Yet, that same patience he showed Israel and Judah is the same patience he showed in the days of Noah. The same patience he showed when a howling mob yelled, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" It's the same patience he shows today. And thank God, He was and is patient with me. But one day, that patience will end in this world. I hope that remedy is at work with the gospel today. Don't you? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow and look at another of the great chapters in the Bible.